Alrighty. I see participants are coming in. This is great. I'm going to get us started. Welcome to the Minnesota Association for College Admission Counseling Virtual College Fair. We're so excited to have you participating in this event. We have a fantastic school here with us today. My name is Chelsea and I will be your facilitator. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. Your camera and microphone are off so the panelists cannot see or hear you. You can use the Q&A button on your screen to type your questions to our presenters at any time. This is just one of many sessions happening, so be sure to check out the schedule on the website. This presentation is being recorded as well as the others and will be available at strivescan.com/Minnesota. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to April to take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Chelsea. Yeah, as she mentioned, I'm April. I'm with Lake Superior College, which is in the background here. I won't talk too much about my college because that's not the purpose of this presentation here. I'll be sharing my screen in a moment, but just to kind of give some context and background, I just wanted to share a little bit about myself before we hop into this. So, yep, like I mentioned, I'm currently at Lake Superior College, which is a community and technical college, which we will get into. I personally attended a 2-year college and then transferred. So I went to Anoka Ramsey and then transferred to UMD. So I think it's kind of important to understand when you're talking with admissions reps, their backgrounds and kind of getting their perspective on things, because we all come from different places. We all have experience at different schools. So it just kind of helps to have a bit of that transparency, because there's really no one way to do college, which we'll kind of talk about when we're doing this presentation here. And yeah, as Chelsea mentioned, feel free to share things in that Q&A bar. I'm the only presenter, so I will do my best to answer them. Probably towards the end, I'll like kind of run through and see if there's some general questions that might pertain to the whole group. If you have any other specific questions for me, I will just shoot you my contact info and we can go from there. But I'm gonna share my screen here. So, all right, so you're here. We are doing this technical 2-year and 4-year, which degree is right for you. So let's just kind of hop right in. So this is just kind of what we're gonna cover in this presentation. It's kind of a lofty presentation to be able to cover all of this in less than an hour. So it's going to be a really general overview of information. Obviously, if you want really specific details, I definitely encourage you to look at the Minnesota Department of Higher Ed website, which I'll kind of link to at the end because that's where all of my sources and information came from. It's just a really nice, like unbiased, like full picture look at the colleges in Minnesota. So we'll kind of go over getting started, like the general college journey, including identifying what you want, because that's really kind of, you know, the first piece in all of this. I'm going to do a quick run through of like the different degree types, like what does it mean when someone says, you know, a college degree, and then we'll jump into the actual overview of the colleges themselves. Again, I'm not talking about specific colleges or calling you know, attention to any individual university or college. It's really just like a general what you can expect from these different programs and universities. And then I'll do a little bit of, you know, some stats, some numbers and stuff, because, you know, I think that's kind of important. It helps kind of quantify things as opposed to just, you know, general feel of what you want. And then we'll end, I can run through those Q&A questions if any come through, but I'm also going to share just kind of like a screen that has some good questions that I think are worth asking when you're doing these college visits and when you know, are maybe talking to a rep or just doing your research in general. So getting started here, I kind of put this like super simple college timeline together. So generally speaking, your first kind of stage, and you know, there might be, you'll come back to this as you go through your journey, but is research. So that's gathering information, talking to us college reps, doing things like this, these, you know, fairs and everything. I think it's also important, it's really easy to get caught up in just college specifically and getting really excited about like, ooh, where am I going to go? What should I study? But I think it's important at this time to also look at careers too. So, and that doesn't just mean like having lists of names of careers. It also means, what does it look like day in, day out doing that job? Sometimes that might mean shadowing someone. So say you want to be a nurse, like maybe you can ask someone who's a nurse, like, hey, can I just come visit you at work someday and see, what that looks like? Because, it's important to pick something that you're going to enjoy doing for a long time. You can always change your mind. Decisions can be made. You can always make a different decision, but it's nice to kind of have a better idea of exactly what you're going into. And of course, you're not expected to know all of it right away. So then we move on to visits. So that's where you're physically going to the campus, or in these days, sometimes it's like a virtual, 3D tour. But ideally, if you can go to the campus, you definitely should take advantage of field trips that your school does to colleges, and just kind of get out and about as much as you can, because you really don't know what a college is like until you actually can visit it, until you can actually set foot on that college campus. This is typically done your sophomore or junior year. I wouldn't do it much sooner than that, just because it's, things can change in a few years' time. So really your junior year is probably the best time to visit colleges, because you'll want to be prepared for your first semester of senior year when you're applying to colleges. So that typically happens in the fall, usually before December. But of course, there's plenty of colleges that will accept applications year-round. So once you get all of those applications in, and it's important to have some money set aside for that too. Again, I'm speaking as someone, I was the first in my family to go to college. So a lot of this information is just stuff I wish someone had told me, because I just didn't have that kind of background knowledge going into it. Applications can kind of add up and be costly. So just bear in mind when you are applying to kind of maybe have some savings set aside for that. And there are also colleges that'll, do it for free. You can do a waiver. Finally, for deciding, so this is probably the hardest part, and this is really where that research piece can come in handy, because you can look back at all of the research you compiled about different schools and really kind of decide, what's ultimately going to be the best fit for you. Maybe you go back and tour that school again. It's a really big decision to make, so take your time doing that. And then you'll enroll. So that's when you sign up for classes. That's when you meet, your advisor, you do welcome week, all of that fun stuff, and you officially become a student of that college. And then I just add this last one, just have fun at college. So as we're in this research phase here, I think it's important to figure out how to identify what you want, because there's so many different colleges, universities, degrees, programs, jobs. It's very overwhelming. It's still overwhelming to me, and I've already done it. So I think it's important to really kind of get to know yourself and understand what you're looking for. So the college you choose should ultimately fit you and your goals. And so I listed a few things to consider. Obviously, there are more, but these are kind of the big overarching things. And this will carry us through this presentation when we're looking at the kind of three main types of college. So first one would be campus setting. So where physically and what environment is the school in? Is it in an urban, bustling city with tons of people around, like a huge, vibrant art scene? Is it in a smaller town? Is it a smaller school? Is there, is the area really focused around this college? And sometimes if you're from a rural area, you want to go somewhere urban, or vice versa, or you just want a new change of scenery. Sometimes you want to stick with what's comfortable. Changing colleges, going to college, is already a big enough, life change, that sometimes doing a huge, complete reworking of your life is a lot. So the next thing, which is honestly probably one of the first things people look at, is tuition and financial aid. So when you're looking at tuition and costs of college, it's important to keep in mind not just the tuition rate, not just the per credit cost, but everything else that might go with it. So that could be housing, fees. Fees are a big one. Books, if you need special supplies. And when you're looking at that tuition price, it's also important to look at the financial aid package that's generally offered to students, because sometimes a school might have a really big tuition cost, but they can also maybe offer more financial aid. So it might offset some of that, and it might actually be kind of a competitive option to choose. Of course, then student life, activities, athletics, kind of all the fun stuff that make up the rest of your college experience. Because it's not all studying, it's not all, doing your program. A lot of it is everything that happens outside of the classroom can be just as important. So looking at, the clubs that are offered, do they have band? Do they have choir? Do they have the competitive sport that you've been doing your whole life? Do you want to compete with other schools, or do you just want to keep doing it for fun? All of those things are important to kind of look at. Same with housing and food. So we'll really kind of talk about housing in this, just because it really does vary between different kinds of colleges. So you might have dorms and you might be required to stay at dorms at certain schools. You might have to live off campus. Maybe you live at home, or maybe you get an apartment in the area. All of those things will have an impact on your time in college. Same with food. Do you get a meal plan where you can just eat everything you want all day? Or is there like a cafeteria on campus or a cafe that you pay for each meal? What about food in the area? Are there places you want to go? And of course, class size, the student population and demographics, the programs. It's really important to go to a school that has the program you want. Don't try to fit, a square peg in a round hole. If you don't want to do the programs at that school, it's probably not worth going there. And then finally, retention and employment rates. Those are like maybe less important at this stage, but it's still something to keep in mind, especially as you're going towards like those more career focused programs. Those can kind of be more of a factor. And I always like to add to think about your post-college life too. So like I mentioned in the beginning, all of that research and stuff, think about the actual career you want. Like what do you want your life to look like after you graduate? Because that can really have an impact on what school you decide to go to. So here's just kind of a brief overview of the different degree types that there are. So I kind of like to include this because one, there's no such thing as stupid questions, and there's a lot of stuff that we admissions reps say that might not actually be familiar to you, and you might be too afraid to ask. So I always like to just like, we're all on the same page here, like let's get the same kind of definitions out there. And I also know there are some questions coming through, and I promise I will get to them, or they might be answered in the presentation. So just keep that in mind too. So the first one is the certificate. This is typically the smallest kind of degree that you can get. And it wouldn't even necessarily be called a degree. It would really just be called a certificate. It's typically really specialized training in a specific area or skill. For example, say you're a welder and you want to add another kind of welding, like gas tungsten welding, onto your, base of knowledge that you already had. Maybe you've been working for a little while and you want to go back and like kind of add essentially to your toolbox. That would be a certificate. Or certain jobs you only need a certificate to do, like truck driving or a certified nursing assistant. Some of you might already have something like this because you can usually do like nursing assistant you can do when you're in high school. And so that would be a certificate option. So a diploma is where you would, similar to a certificate, you're getting training for a specific career, but it's usually a bit longer. A certificate might be 6 weeks to just under a year, whereas a diploma is probably going to be at least 1 year, generally 2 years. And again, for more just specific career types. So I think of things like massage therapy or cybersecurity. And then we kind of move into the associate's degree. And that can be training for a specific career, so like the diploma, or what it's more often used for is to transfer to a bachelor's degree. So an associate's degree, think of it like, you can get your diploma in your specific thing, whereas the associate's degree also has all of those, we call them liberal arts classes or generals. You'll hear the word generals a lot. Those are just the classes that everyone has to take if they're going to do a bachelor's degree. So things like writing, college writing 101, certain math classes, humanities classes like history, philosophy, those kinds of things. Those are also usually the really fun classes you can take. So you can take really interesting, kinds of classes to complete that liberal arts or generals package. So you can do that at the associate's level. And that is typically what you do to then transfer to a bachelor's degree, which it's when we talk about college and talk about getting a college degree, we're most often talking about bachelor's degrees. So that's going to a 4-year school. It might be required for, oops, oh no, go back. It might be required for certain careers. So I think of things like teaching or accounting, where you have to get a bachelor's degree and do kind of like a licensing program with it. But it can also be just more broad things, so we think of like a bachelor in sociology or a bachelor of science in chemistry. And sometimes those are used to then go even more in school and do a graduate degree. So we won't talk about graduate degrees, in this session, because that's like way down the line for you. But it is important to keep in mind if you are looking at certain careers that will require it, like being a psychologist or a lawyer, you might be looking at 2 to 7 more years of school. So we're going to hop into the actual kind of overview of the different types of colleges here. So first we're doing technical college. And when I am talking about technical college, these are usually grouped together with those 2-year community colleges, but we're just kind of splitting it out for the sake of clarity, because they are kind of really different. They're geared for different students. So technical colleges prepare students for a certain trade or career. They're usually the certificates and diploma options is what you'd normally find at a technical school. So technical colleges, kind of at a glance here, these are really good for students who want to start working. They don't really want to do much more school than they have to, usually 2 years or less in a very hands-on kind of in-demand career. So average timeline for something like this, you're looking as little as a semester for something like a certificate, or up to 3 years for something like nursing, which would, again, typically be an associate's degree. But this just kind of gives some context, because again, they often are at the same school. Class style is super hands-on. You're usually learning, out on the job or in lab spaces. Again, I'm at Lake Superior College, so that's kind of where my program knowledge comes from. Like, I'm just very familiar with our programs, but it's similar at other technical colleges throughout the state and country. But I think of like our carpentry program, which is a diploma. It's a 2-year diploma. The first year they're in the wood shop like constantly. And then the second year, the entire time they're out literally offsite building a full house, like from the ground up. So stuff like that, where you're doing the kind of tasks that you would do in your daily job. Housing, it's important to point out that usually for a technical community 2-year college, they don't normally have dorms. However, a lot of community colleges will partner with local universities and 4-year colleges that have dorms. So you can still have that option, still get a meal plan. If they don't do that, most students will just stay either at home, because there's usually colleges really close to home, or they'll do an off-campus rental. So places like Duluth, for example, we're a very college friendly town. So most of the apartments are actually created with students in mind, and it essentially looks like dorms. So when you're looking at colleges, also make sure you're asking about housing, how you can pay for it. At technical colleges, usually like at LSC, for example, most of these programs don't have class on Friday because they know you're going to be working. Most of our students are working and going to school. That's what I did. I was working full-time, going to school full-time. And so they are aware of that, and they kind of build their schedule accordingly so that you can have that time to work. And then just some examples of things you can do with a diploma. Here are just some different programs. There's like medical assistant, welding, cosmetology, being an electrician, construction, really those, again, hands-on degrees. And this is just a very small sample. If you look online, at the different colleges, you'll definitely see just how much is actually out there. And if something even just like kind of piques your interest, it's worth looking into, because you never know if you'll like it. So that brings us to 2-year colleges. Again, usually the same as technical colleges, but they also often include that transfer pathway. And I really like this photo because I think it's pretty representative of what it's like to go to a 2-year college, because it's a lot more diverse. Sometimes you have adult learners in the class as well who are either, adding on certificates for their current job or like changing careers. So it's really fun to kind of get like this wide variety of perspective in your classes. So two-year colleges, again, usually pair with technical schools, and also a great option for students looking to a transfer to a four-year degree. So again, this is what I did. I went to a two-year college, got my creative writing degree, and then transferred to a four-year school. And that's usually a really good option for students. One, for students who are undecided, students who maybe aren't quite ready to like jump right into a four-year university setting, but a transfer pathway will usually last around 2 years. And typically you would get your associate's degree with that. The class style, again, it's really good for students who are looking for kind of a smaller class size. So typically your classes are around 15 to maybe 40 students, depending on the school. So that's definitely something you can ask about. And the different programs. So again, they'll usually have the same kind of programs as a technical school would. They're usually combined. But you can also do that transfer pathway either for a specific major. So you can be like, I'm going to major in psychology, so I want to transfer with a lot of psychology classes, or just completing those kind of general liberal arts requirements. One thing I hear a lot, even when I was in school, is this kind of like misconception that community colleges aren't the real college experience. But like I mentioned, a lot of them will partner with dorms, so you can get that kind of dorm experience. They all have, clubs, activities. Most of them have competitive athletics. And it's really good to know that about 41% of students actually do attend a two-year college, either just to do the 2 years or to then transfer. So there's kind of this like concept or this feeling in society and in media that everyone goes to a four-year school and has like this amazing time in the dorms, but that's really not reality. We all have different lives. We all are coming from different backgrounds. So this is a really common path for students to take. But that brings us to four-year colleges, often also called universities. So universities are really focused on, four-year bachelor programs. So this also prepares students for different careers that require a bachelor's degree, graduate school. Typically your earnings will be higher with a bachelor's degree, but not necessarily. But also for me, what I loved about my four-year school was just like really being able to immerse myself in my studies and really dive deep into what I was interested in. So when we think of college, usually we're thinking of a four-year college or university. There's typically two pathways you can do. So there's public colleges and private colleges. So public are usually larger. So the University of Minnesota, for example, is a public four-year university, whereas private schools are usually smaller. Maybe they specialize in liberal arts or music or something like that. And they also can offer generous financial aid, typically, just because they have a lot more funding available. So don't be too afraid of the sticker price of private schools. If you're really set on it, just talk with an admissions rep and kind of figure out how you can help pay for that. Class size. So first year courses, this is where you see those kind of big lectures. That's typically what you would find at a university. So they can have hundreds of students, 100 to 400 students, but the classes do get smaller as you get into higher levels. So one of my majors, honestly, both of my majors were really small. So by the time I got to my senior year, my philosophy seminar for my philosophy major was, I think, 5 students. So they can get really small, whereas like an intro philosophy course might have been 200. So that don't let that intimidate you, because just know once you get further along in your degree, they typically shrink down quite a bit. And then with timeline, so usually a bachelor's degree on paper will take 4 years, but it can take longer, especially if you change majors. So if you come in undecided, and then maybe you start down an engineering path and then realize, that's not for you, and you switch to teaching, you might have to take new classes. So it might just add a semester or two to your overall progress. If you double major, which I did, sometimes that can add some time. if you study abroad, and study abroad won't necessarily add time, but that's just another thing that can come up and kind of throw off your schedule. But of course, also just life circumstances can pop up. It's not uncommon to take longer than 4 years to finish a degree. Ideally, you would do it in 4 because, you know, that's less money that you have to pay. But just know that and plan accordingly when you're kind of thinking about your financial aid package. So at a university, which I'm kind of using university and 4-year college interchangeably because they are essentially the same thing. So there's majors and minors. So you major, that's like your main focus, like what you want to study. And then you can add a minor either to kind of supplement your major, like maybe you are going into business and you want to do something in business. And so you also pick up a minor in a second language so that you can do business internationally. Some majors are, you know, they require this bachelor's degree to then get their licensing requirement met. So I use accountant and teacher. Those are just 2 examples, but those are where you are doing a specific path to a specific degree that leads to a specific career that you would then kind of need really specialized training for. But others are just can be general or really specialized, and the career options for those are really kind of unlimited. So I think of business, philosophy, art. I use philosophy because that's one of my majors. I also majored in women's studies. Like there's just, if you can dream it, you can probably major in it. And don't be afraid if it doesn't have a clear path. Like philosophy doesn't have a clear career ahead of it, but it's more about studying what you're interested in and what you're passionate about and what you can succeed in, and simultaneously building your resume, getting jobs, getting internships, so that when you graduate, you don't just have a degree. You know, a lot of people have degrees. You also have this resume and experience, and it's much easier to get hired. And then furthermore, some careers will require even more school. So then you would go to grad schools. So again, like I use those examples, psychologist, you know, a lawyer, a doctor, you would go to another school and study even longer. So you might not really be working until you're almost, you know, 26 to 30 years old. So if that's what you really want, if that's what you're passionate about, it's absolutely worth pursuing. But if you're like, I'd rather start working much sooner than that, then maybe look at something adjacent to that career. So instead of a doctor, maybe you start as a nurse and then decide if you want to go back to school. So this is the part where I just do some numbers. We won't spend too much time on this, but I do think it just kind of helps to kind of quantify things and look at it from a different perspective. So first, I just pulled the average tuition. Again, all of this info comes from Minnesota Office of Higher Education. I'll have a little link at the end there, but this is from 2020. So this is the average tuition. So keep in mind that tuition is just the cost of the classes. This doesn't include fees, and it doesn't include room and board. So that can add a lot of money right there. And room and board, again, if you're living off campus, would be like your rent for your apartment. So 2 years averaging about $5,500. A public 4-year, it's kind of split. They split it into 2 categories. So there's a system called the Minnesota State Colleges and Universities system. So that's places like St. Cloud, Bemidji, Winona, Mankato, those schools. So that's about $8,800. And then there's the U of M system, which is, you know, University of Minnesota has 5 different campuses. They have like Crookston, Rochester, Duluth here, the Twin Cities, of course. So that is looking at closer to $15,000. And then the private 4-year colleges, which are places like St. Thomas or St. Olaf, that's averaging closer to $42,000, again, before room and board, books, supplies. Books are a big one. When I first went to school, again, as a first generation low income student, I thought I was all set. I had my tuition done, figured out at my 2-year school, and then I went to pay for books, and it was like $600, and I was not expecting that. So again, these are just things to keep in mind as you're going through your college journey and looking at your financial aid award packages. This is the income to debt ratio. So I have a big caveat with this, of course, and that is this average income is based on 2012 college graduates 4 years after they graduated. So this information is from 2016. It's their most recent information, but it wouldn't have changed too much in the last 5 years, maybe a couple $1,000s here and there. But just as a general average, certificate, you're looking at, 42,000, associates 44. So those will be things like firefighting, nursing, and then a bachelor's degree, which could, be pretty much anything as well, is about 50,000. And then average debt. So this is the money that you have to pay back. You can get grants and scholarships, which is free money, which you should do as much of as you can. But if you do take out student loans, this is the average. So just comparing the 3 different degrees there, and then the percentage of students who take out that debt. So when you're looking at averages, some students will have much higher debt and some students will have lower. So this is, again, just kind of the middle ground. Same with income. When you're looking at income for certain careers, I highly recommend researching, like going to Indeed.com or some kind of job board, maybe LinkedIn, and looking at the specific, like current job postings of the program you're interested in the area you're interested in, because the Twin Cities is probably going to pay more than the Iron Range just because of the location. So keep that in mind too when you're looking at average income. Make sure it's relevant to where you'll be doing your job. And then I also like to point out debt to income ratio. Again, not to get super mathy, but it is, when you're looking at things like this, it's really important to keep this in mind. These numbers are ginormous. And so it's easy to like just kind of see this and be like, well, it's all a lot, so like it doesn't matter. But I promise when you graduate, every little bit is going to matter when you're starting to pay this back. So for a certificate, for example, you have $10,000 in debt, which is significant, but it's about a quarter of your income. Whereas with a bachelor's degree, you have 24,000, and sure, you make more money, but that's about half of your take-home pay. So it'll take much longer to pay it off. Again, not to dissuade anyone from a bachelor's degree. I'm very happy with mine. I loved school, but just go into it with understanding of, one, what all of the options are. If you know you want a hands-on job, just do that. And 2, get as much free money, grants, scholarships as you can. And I always like to include this quote from Benjamin Franklin, because an investment in knowledge always pays the best interest. No one can take away what you've learned. And so don't just focus so much on the numbers that you refuse to pursue what you're passionate about. If you want to know more, if you want to study a certain topic, do it. Just go into it knowing what you're getting into and take on as little debt as you can so that you have more options for yourself in the future. So, questions. So when you go to college visits, or if you have a college rep come to your school, a lot of times we'll be like, what questions do you have? Or do you have any questions? And that can be a really stressful thing to try and answer, because sometimes you just don't even know what to ask. Again, there's no such thing as stupid questions, but I understand how it can feel overwhelming to be like, I don't even know what college is. Like, can you help? So I put together a few questions, and feel free to take like a photo or something of the slide, because I think it can be helpful to have even just like 2 questions that you ask at every college tour, or every rep visit, because then it can just really, it'll help you get a lot of information. And looking at this, you'll have some that really are important to you. And so just be sure to always ask that. So I kind of split it into different categories. And this really does tie in with the different kinds of colleges, because different technical versus a university will have a really different answer to these questions. So like, for example, how many classes are taught by teaching assistants? So at a community and technical college, typically the instructors are people who are either currently working in their field or very recently were working in the field, and they just really wanted to kind of train the next generation of welders or whatever it is. Whereas at a university, the professors are people who have PhDs, they do really incredible research, but they're often not teaching those kind of first level classes because their research is usually more important. Like if they're researching cancer, like they're probably going to focus on that, and they'll typically teach the higher division classes. So it's kind of nice to know like who you're actually learning from. I also recommend always asking what the full cost to attend colleges. So tuition plus fees plus room and board plus any specific supplies you might need. So I think of my friend's, she was an art education major. And so for part of her art degree, she had a certain laptop requirement so she could run different, design programs. And that was a pretty substantial cost. So that's good to know before you start the program. General financial aid questions. How do I apply for scholarships? Usually schools will have kind of like a scholarship window when you can start applying. Work study opportunities. I always recommend working on campus if you can, because we're usually a lot easier to and more flexible with a student schedule than if you worked off campus. 4-year graduation rate, that's kind of a good thing to know if you're looking at bachelor's degrees. So how many students can actually complete this degree in 4 years? One of my favorite questions is how many students have a job in their field of study? So admissions reps, we will almost certainly talk about our placement rate. And placement rate is how many students have a job after they graduate. So you could have a 97% placement rate, which is quite good. But it doesn't help if a lot of those students are working at Starbucks or, kind of working at jobs that they didn't intend to work in. Nothing against working at Starbucks, but if you're going to school to be a nurse and you end up not becoming a nurse and they have a lot of students doing that, that's good to know. So ask specifically about jobs in their field of study. And a lot of colleges will have reports on this that you can even look at, and you can see, you can kind of do your own research. I always recommend doing as much research on your own as you can, especially at websites like I'm going to share in the next slide, like Minnesota Department of Higher Ed. They don't have a stake in where you go to school, so they just report the facts. Academic support. So what tutoring services do you have? What kind of support do you have for students, like academic advising? Will you be assigned an advisor? And then these ones that we kind of talked about earlier too, of course, housing options, activities on campus. If you're really into theater, like you should probably go somewhere that has at least a theater club or theater opportunities for non-majors, or of course a theater major if that's what you want to do, but just kind of making sure that the things that you're interested in are offered on campus. So, and again, this is just some questions. There's many, many more that you could ask, but this might hopefully get kind of your inspiration for when you start visiting schools. So that kind of wraps it up. Like I said, this was where I went to for all of that information. So these were kind of the 3 main ones I looked at. So feel free to use this QR code. This is a really great resource for high school students as you're looking at colleges, because again, it just lists all of the programs, all of the schools, like how financial aid works, how you can prepare for college, and all of that fun stuff. I have a few questions here, or one question in particular that I think was a really good one that I just wanted to answer. So someone asked if it'd be best to start with a 2-year college, then figure out if you're ready to do a 4-year degree. My answer to that is, I think if you're asking the question, I think that absolutely. I think a 2-year school is a really good option for students who are undecided. And it's for a couple of reasons. One is just the smaller class sizes really help a lot. I was a really good student, but transitioning to college was it was rough for me. And having such small classes, my instructors knew me, they noticed when I started to struggle, and they personally reached out to me and got me connected with resources on campus. So I definitely think it's good for that. And also, like I said, I majored in women's studies and philosophy. Those were not classes I took in high school. I had no idea you could major in something like that. So the other benefit of doing a 2-year school is you can just like take a bunch of random different subjects that you've never been exposed to, and you're not paying nearly as much money. So there's less of that kind of risk involved and less pressure. My boss, she attended a 4-year college right away, and she said she wishes she went the 2-year route. She had no idea what she wanted to do, and there was just a lot more pressure for her to kind of like figure it out right away, because she was spending like $15,000 a year. So I think that's definitely another good reason. Another question here is, what's the best way to try and avoid too much debt? And I would definitely recommend, honestly, just take a week and just apply to scholarships. Ask your high school counselor. They'll have a really good resources for where you can find scholarships. Apply to scholarships directly through the school you want to go to. Apply for scholarships just from external resources. And just try and get as much free money as you can. There's so many students just leave scholarships on the table because they think it's be too much work or they won't get it. But you'd be amazed at like how much money there is out there for all kinds of students. So I definitely recommend that. Also, if you're not sure what you want to do, I think it's good to like get a job, as simple as it sounds, but try and get as much experience working as you can and kind of figuring out what you enjoy doing. Like maybe you really like an office job. Maybe you like, clocking in at 9, clocking out at 5, like having your tasks. In that case, maybe you just want to get an associate's degree and be a bookkeeper and like you'll be happy with that. Or if you really want to like be a doctor, maybe you start at a 2-year school because you're going to be in school for 10 years. So you might as well, save money at the front end as much as you can. So those are just like a few ways to do it. You can also go to school part-time and work and pay it off as you go. That's not as much of an option as it used to be in the past, but that's definitely another way too. And then, yeah, so I think those were kind of like the main questions. And then there was also like kind of what's the difference between a college and university. We often use those words interchangeably. A university though will only ever be like a 4-year school. You wouldn't have a 2-year university. I also didn't talk about private 2-year colleges just because those are typically more often geared like kind of for-profit institutions. So you're paying way more money for those and not really getting as much in the way of like job security or things like that. But again, do your own research and don't just take an admission representative's word, at face value. It's important to really like make sure that you know what you're getting into and that you'll be able to be successful regardless of what you do. Yeah, those were kind of all the questions. Again, my name is April from Lake Superior College. You can find my info online. Yeah, it was great to chat with you all.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Alrighty, I'm going to wrap us up here really quickly. All right. Perfect. Okay. Maybe we won't. Alrighty. Let's try that again. Okay, perfect. All right. So thank you so much, April, for your time and for all that information. And thank you to all of our participants for joining us this evening. When you close this window, there will be a link to a very quick 5-question survey. We'd appreciate any feedback that you can provide. We encourage you to check back the schedule and sign up for more sessions if you're interested. You'll be able to find this session's recording as well as the other recordings at strivescan.com/Minnesota. Thanks so much and have a great evening.